Welcome to today's episode of Global Perspective on Trade. We are focusing on India's performance in the Hinrich-IMD Sustainable Trade Index and its implication for the future of sustainable trade. Joining us is Reena, Senior Partner in International Trade and Indirect Taxation. Welcome, Reena.
Hi, Nishant.
So, moving on to the questions directly. Recently, the Hinrich-IMD Sustainable Trade Index ranked India in the 23rd position. Could you start by explaining us that what the Sustainable uh, Trade Index is?
Nishant, the Sustainable Trade Index is broadly an agency which measures how the different global economies are growing in comparison to keeping in mind economic parameters, environmental parameters, as well as social parameters. And the importance of these indexes that with the increasing concentration of wealth, with perhaps 10% of the people having all of the wealth or 90% of the wealth, and also the fact that the climate change is affecting our economies tremendously. These index are important to give indicators to investors as to which are the good markets where they can look for a positive future.
So, which countries are leading in this index, if I can ask that?
Well, the countries leading in the index are broadly New Zealand and UK, and Australia also, of course. On an overall parameter, United States is in 10th position. But when you look at specific parameters, countries like South Korea and Singapore are topping the board for the economic parameters. When we talk about the social parameters, we have New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, which are some of the happy countries. When it comes to environmental parameters, it's the UK and New Zealand which are there. So we are
Right.
seeing the same set of countries
Yeah.
broadly which are doing well.
So, how does India fare in these individual parameters?
Nishant, that's a bit of a sad reflection because India is 23rd. We would have hoped it would be much higher.
Yeah.
Interestingly, on the economic front, we are number 16, which is frankly quite optimistic and good, given that it's a small number of countries which have been looked at. But on the environmental and social fronts, our ranking is quite low. I mean, we are almost at the bottom of the table.
So, can you tell us some challenges that India faces contributing to this ranking?
Well, I would say, these all these rankings are broadly based on three parameters, as I said, the economic parameters, social parameters, as well as environmental parameters. So on the economic front, India is doing well. So I won't be talking about those
Yeah,
challenges. I
that's true.
think everybody knows
Yeah.
is talking about the India story. But when it comes to social and environmental parameters, there are still a lot of hurdles. There's still a lot of inequality, as I had said. There's poverty.
That's
There's
true.
also a lack of access to health. There are gender issues, caste issues in
There are
India.
many actually.
There are
Yeah.
many such issues which are holding India back. Despite a lot of movement, even on the environment front, I mean, you and I are living in Delhi, and we all know about the pollution.
Yeah. In fact, I
So,
would want to understand, from an environment perspective, what's happening.
well, I think what's happening is that there is no doubt India is taking huge strides on the environmental front, but those strides have really not shown results on the ground so far. And I think that's going to take a little time. Some of the things, for instance, we are seeing is that the government has come up with directives for the disclosure of
Yeah.
ESG norms.
Hmm.
There's also the since 23-24 the requirement that along with your annual report you get a BSSR where you're giving complete parameters relating to your value chains, your ESG, all of those. Apart from that, India is also mulling currently setting up carbon markets. Even on the tax front, GST on renewables, many of them are exempted, like whether when we talk about
Hmm.
wind and we talk about solar also to some extent, barring modules and cells, everything else has is usually exempted. Waste also companies or processes which results in a conversion of waste to something
Correct.
which is usable are also either exempted or carry low rates of 5%. So there are a lot of things happening in terms of regulatory changes to protect the environment. I think definitely more needs to be done, and it's going to take a little while to make a
Yep.
difference on the ground. Implementation is always a challenge
Yeah,
in
you have
India.
you have already spoken about, comprehensively about the challenges. Now, what role do Indian companies play in addressing these challenges? What your stake would be on that?
Well, I think, of course, government comes up with a lot of schemes to bring social change, but companies do have funds for CSR, and they can make a substantial difference with those type of investments. I mean, not to mention names, but the Tatas have really transformed many
That's
government schemes and
absolutely
made significant changes in certain
that's true.
regions where they have gone. So it's not as if they can't do anything. Certainly, companies can also make sure that they use clean energy for their value chains,
Very
whatever
important.
materials and things they use. Further, I am not one who believes that the companies have to wait for the government to bring in regulation. This is something that the companies can do on their own
Right.
without waiting for regulation. And in times to come, investors are going to look for disclosures on ESG, and investment decisions are going to be made based on
It's already
ESG
happening
parameters.
actually. Yeah.
Yes, and much more in times to come. And therefore, whatever the government does and whatever regulations come, the fact that companies are already conscious of it and make sure that they are ESG compliant, or rather more than compliant, are doing more than what the regulation asks for them, is going to bring commercial benefits.
So when we are talking about ESG, what is early adoption of ESG practices important for Indian businesses?
Well, Nishant, as I was saying, that to really have a competitive edge, and for investors and businesses looking for the longer perspective, ESG is going to be critical, because uh, social imbalances obviously lead to crime, lead to many other disturbances. Growth is affected. Similarly, if the environment is not taken care of, in times to come, we don't know what could happen. And certainly, climate change is one thing we are straight away is now evident. But rivers, water pollution in water, air pollution, all these are affecting our human capital also. So our ability to work, our ability to grow is all getting hampered. So I think both companies and the government have to be very proactive, and this can be done through taxation, this can be done by regulation. Already there is a lot of regulation, but I think more thinking outside the box is required.
Just one more thing, Reena. What step has India taken to regulate import of environmental waste in trade?
Well, India has government, not now. I mean, we are talking a lot about ESG now, but since many years, government has already introduced a number of controls to restrict the import of hazardous
Yeah.
substances. When we talk about hazardous, we talk not only of things which are directly harmful, but we are also talking about things which are substandard.
Mhm.
So now almost 730 products, 732, I believe, products are already under mandatory quality control. That's also part of ESG, because you ensure that good quality products come in. There are a lot of regulations which have come in related
Right.
to plastics, disposal of plastics, those sort of things. Electronic materials also now, whether you import PCBs or other electronic materials, the disposal of these material is also regulated, and all these regulations are applicable to imports. Similarly, for textiles, there are restrictions on the type of dyes those textiles have.
That-
Agricultural products also face many restrictions. So I think on the regulatory front, India has been very active. Our regulations in relation to import are not as stringent as Europe, but we are getting there.
Thank you, Reena, for your insights and wonderful conversation we had.